I wanted to just capture something really that supplements what we've been talking about, or what we will be talking about in class. And we've been introducing Buddhism and looking at some kind of core early or early-ish teachings and thinking about certain forms of Buddhism. And an issue that often arises when in conversation with students, but also I sometimes think people go away about, and when they reflect on the class they think about this issue, isn't this all awfully miserable? Isn't there such a focus in, for example, early Buddhist teachings on suffering? You know, the four sights the Buddha has are of aging, sickness and death, and he becomes preoccupied by those. Of course, there's the fourth sight of the Shravana renunciant, but there are those initial three, and it's on looking at the causes of the domination of our normal experience of life by aging, sickness, death, the consequences of greed, of hatred, delusion, these things that Buddhism seems to be focused on, or in the Western presentation of Buddhism, these things seem to come to the fore, and certainly you've found in textbooks and books on Buddhism, these things are at the fore. And yet, of course, the world's most famous Buddhist, probably, excepting Rishikesh perhaps, is the Dalai Lama. And what is he always doing? Laughing. You know, he always seems to be kind of laughing about something. So there's an interesting kind of contrast there. I think the most common response that you find to this accusation that Buddhism even is obsessed with suffering or pessimism is the response that Buddhism is realistic, not pessimistic. Now you might always, of course, say, yeah, that's what pessimists always say. So that kind of response. The image that you'll find most commonly used within Buddhism itself and in the study of Buddhism sometimes as well is the image which is kind of clinical, or the image of the Buddha as doctor. And this analysis is often applied to the Four Noble Truths, is called doctrinal teaching, by which it's split then into symptoms, i.e. ouch, life hurts, diagnosis of an underlying cause, that's because you're full of the wrong kinds of bad desire, the possibility of a cure, and then the prescription, the fourth noble truth, which is these 8 steps. So the idea that a doctor is neither pessimistic nor optimistic, rather is interested in causalities. The Buddha, in that analysis, doesn't come and offer a more dark view of life or a more sunny side of the street to walk on, but rather says, let's be honest, there are things about life which are pretty awful, which kind of threaten to drain the colour and importance for everything we do. You know, the fact that everyone you've ever met or cared about, and including yourself, will get old, get ill and die, isn't that fundamentally, existentially shocking? And doesn't that, you know, threaten everything? Isn't it kind of awful? Can we do something about it? The fact that even the most pleasant experiences we have in life, we are often aware of their fleetingness and imperfections with them. Why can't we just enjoy things for what they are? So how do we live more happily with less suffering? This seems to be actually, when you look at the detail of it, and as we'll come to look at the detail of it in the module, this is the question that Buddhism seemed interesting. So often, despite this presentation of suffering, what I want to kind of try and concentrate in future, in the module and perhaps in some podcasts, is the intention for many forms of Buddhism is, how can I suffer less? How can I take pleasure in the pleasant things and find ways of coping with the less pleasant things much more efficiently, much more effectively? And I think this chimes well with the use of Buddhist-inspired techniques like mindfulness meditation for the treatment of various forms of anxiety that people have. Where people have anxiety such that it's actually making them less able to enjoy life in quite serious ways. Mindfulness is a way of reducing the anxiety, or those that advocate it would propose that. We'll have to come to judgment ourselves about whether we find that advocacy persuasive. But Buddhism claims to be then, in contrast to this easily kind of picked up stereotype of pessimism, it claims to be a route out of distress and despair. And it says, if it wasn't for the promises that Buddhism makes, or the claims that Buddhism makes about there being possibilities of escaping all these things, it would be awful. But there are things we can do, and they make things better, and there are things that ultimately make it better, according to at least many forms of Buddhism. So it seems pessimistic, maybe it's realistic. Buddhism has styled itself using this idea of a doctor who analyses what's going on and what we can do about it, and seeing as the cure, according to Buddhism, is available to all, and we can all partake of it, many Buddhists at least would want to propose that far from being pessimistic, that once you start to study it and get a real sense of it, there's, amongst the suffering, the misery, and the not getting what you want, and all those things, there's actually a real possibility for allowing ourselves to have a much richer and deeper sense, not of misery, but of joy and bliss and happiness. And that's going to be a good thing.